Let's kick things off with a question you've probably kicked around yourself. It's a simple one, but it opens up this huge mystery about intelligence, progress, and really, the nature of our own minds.
I mean, it's a classic debate, right? You talk about it around the dinner table. But what if there was actual data on this? Well, back in the 1980s, a researcher was digging through some old test scores and found a clue so startling it would completely change how we think about intelligence forever.
So meet James Flynn. And what's interesting is he wasn't an intelligence researcher. Nope. He was a political scientist from New Zealand who was just curious. And as he was sifting through decades of data from American IQ tests, he found something that honestly seemed impossible at first. That's the number. He discovered that on average, Americans had gained a massive 13.8 IQ points in just 46 years. Now, to put that into perspective, a jump that big should be world-changing. It's like taking someone with a totally average score back in 1932 and turning them into someone in the top 15% by 1978. It was like a silent explosion in how we perform on these tests.
Okay, so the big question is what on earth is going on here? Did humanity just get some kind of massive brain upgrade all of a sudden? Well, to get Flynn's discovery, you first have to understand the kind of weird hidden world of how IQ tests are actually built.
And this brings us to this really crucial idea: test standardization. Think about it this way. An IQ test isn't like a ruler, where an inch is always an inch. Instead, that score of 100 is always being recentered to be the average for whatever generation is taking the test right now. This process, they call it norming, and it means the goalposts for what's considered an average IQ are always on the move.
And this is how Flynn cracked the case. He realized that if you take an average person from 1978 and give them the 1978 test, they score 100. But, and here's the trick, if you take that exact same person and give them the test that was normed way back in 1932, their score shoots up to around 114. Why? Because the bar for average was set so much lower back then. It was just an easier target to beat. He was basically comparing people across time using their own yardstick.
And look, this was not some statistical fluke. Flynn's work was incredibly thorough. He pulled together data from 73 different studies, covering almost 7,500 people. And it didn't matter how he sliced it, the pattern was just undeniable. Scores were, consistently, decade after decade, going up.
Okay, so problem solved, right? We're all just getting smarter. Woohoo! Well, not so fast. Because as soon as Flynn proved that IQ scores were on the rise, he ran headfirst into this giant, inconvenient fact that seemed to prove the exact opposite.
And here's Flynn himself, in his own words, from that 1984 paper, calling the situation almost inexplicable. He knew he was looking at a massive paradox. On the one hand, his data showed intelligence going up. On the other hand, data from another huge cognitive test showed it was going down.
And this slide just lays out the mystery perfectly. During the very same time Flynn saw these huge IQ gains, scores on the SAT, America's big college entrance exam, were in a total freefall. Two major tests, both supposedly measuring cognitive ability, were heading in completely opposite directions. I mean, this is the puzzle at the heart of it all. If an entire population is getting better at the kind of abstract problem-solving you find on IQ tests, how could they possibly be getting worse at the verbal and math skills the SAT measures? Are we somehow getting smarter and dumber at the same time? It just doesn't make any sense.
So this paradox, it forced Flynn and a lot of other researchers to think about a really radical idea. What if the numbers were right, but the way we were reading them was all wrong? What if that 13.8-point gain didn't actually mean we were becoming more intelligent? What if it was just some kind of illusion, a ghost in the machine of psychological testing? And that brings us to the real clue for solving this mystery, something called obsolete norms. It's just a fancy term for what we were talking about earlier. When you use an old test, its norms, its whole definition of what's average, are completely out of date. It's kind of like a video game where the high score was set 20 years ago. If you beat it today, it doesn't automatically mean you're a better player. It could just mean the controllers are better, the strategies are better, the whole environment has changed.
And to see just how powerful this illusion can be, Flynn pointed to this famous educational experiment from the 70s called the Milwaukee Project. It is the perfect case study to see these obsolete norms in action.
So, the project took a group of children who were at high risk for intellectual disabilities and put them into this super intensive enrichment program.
And the initial results, they were just breathtaking. These kids were posting average IQs above 120. We're talking genius territory. But then, as they got older and started taking different tests, their scores just seemed to crash, dropping by more than 20 points.
So the whole scientific community was in an uproar. First, they're celebrating this unbelievable success. Then, they're scrambling to figure out why these brilliant kids suddenly lost their edge. But Flynn, he looked at the data, and he saw a very familiar pattern. He suspected the kids hadn't changed at all. The tests had.
So, when Flynn went back and adjusted the scores, when he corrected for those outdated norms of the tests they took when they were little, the illusion just vanished. These kids were never geniuses. Their IQs were always in a totally normal, healthy range, right around 105. And that big 20-point drop, also an illusion. The real story, and it's a tragic one, was a very real 10-point drop that happened the moment they left that special program and entered struggling public schools.
So the mystery of the Milwaukee Project was solved. The miracle and then the crash were both just statistical artifacts. They happened because people were comparing scores from tests that were normed in different decades. It was a classic case of obsolete norms creating a story that just wasn't real. And that brings us all the way back to the big picture. The Flynn Effect, which is what they call it now, is a very real thing. The scores have gone up. But just like in the Milwaukee Project, it doesn't mean what we might think it means. It doesn't mean our fundamental general intelligence has just skyrocketed past our ancestors.
So what do we take away from all this? Well, first, the scores really have risen, consistently and dramatically. Second, this probably isn't a rise in general intelligence, what some psychologists call G, but more a rise in specific skills, like abstract problem solving. As for why, well, that's still being debated. It could be anything from better nutrition, to more schooling, to just living in a more complex visual world. But maybe the most important thing is that it proves an IQ score isn't some fixed biological number you're just born with. It's deeply, profoundly shaped by the world you grow up in.
In his paper, Flynn actually calculated the odds of this steady, generation after generation rise happening just by pure chance. The odds were more than 5,000 to 1. So the trend is absolutely real. But the funny thing is, discovering this trend didn't solve a mystery. It actually created a new, much deeper one about what intelligence even is.
And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? If this number that we've treated for so long as this stable measure of cognitive horsepower can be so dramatically affected by our environment in just a few decades, what does that say about the test itself? What are we truly capturing when we try to put a single number on the human mind?